Millionaire abandons wife. 10 years later, he sees her at the airport with a young man who looks just like him. He tries to approach them. Chicago's airport was bustling with activity that Friday morning. Andrew Thompson, a 45-year-old successful businessman, hurried toward his boarding gate. Dressed in an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase, he constantly checked his gold watch. Another business trip, he thought, sighing. Despite his success, Andrew felt an emptiness that all the money in the world couldn't fill. Suddenly, something caught his eye. A woman with brown hair walked by him, holding the hand of a boy about 10 years old. Andrew stopped, his mouth agape. The woman's face was all too familiar. "Sarah," he murmured, incredulous. But it wasn't just the sight of Sarah that shocked him. The boy beside her was like looking into a mirror of the past. The same green eyes, the same unruly blonde hair, even the way he walked was identical to Andrew's as a child. A flashback hit Andrew like a punch in the stomach. He saw himself 10 years earlier, sneaking out of the apartment he shared with Sarah, leaving only a cold letter on the kitchen table. Sarah's face, sleeping peacefully, unaware that her life was about to crumble. Andrew felt his legs wobble. Could it be, he thought in panic. Was Sarah pregnant? Guilt consumed him. Had he abandoned not only his wife but also a son? A son he didn't even know existed? Andrew began walking towards Sarah and the boy, his heart racing. He needed to talk to them, to explain, to understand what was happening. But the crowd at the airport closed in between them. Andrew found himself pushing people, desperately trying to reach Sarah and the boy. "Sarah," he yelled, but his voice was lost in the noise of the airport. When he finally made it through the crowd, Sarah and the boy had disappeared. Andrew looked around frantically, but there was no sign of them. "Sir? Sir, are you all right?" a flight attendant asked, noticing his agitated state. Andrew barely heard her. His phone rang. It was Vanessa, his current wife. He ignored the call, still looking around, hoping to see Sarah and the boy. "Sir, your flight is departing," the flight attendant insisted. Andrew looked at her, then at the boarding gate, and back to the airport lobby. In that moment, he made a decision that would change his life forever. I'm not boarding," he said, still distracted. The flight attendant looked surprised, but Andrew was already walking away, determined. He couldn't just leave now. He needed to find out the truth. Exiting the airport, Andrew hailed a cab. Downtown, he told the driver, his mind racing. As the cab merged into Chicago traffic, Andrew pulled out his phone. Ignoring missed calls from Vanessa, he dialed the number of an old friend, a private detective. "Frank? It's Andrew. I need your help to find someone," he said as soon as his friend answered. As he gave Frank the details he remembered about Sarah, Andrew couldn't stop thinking about the boy. His son? Did he have a son? Guilt, curiosity, and a fear he couldn't name mingled in his chest. Andrew knew his life was about to change dramatically. And, for the first time in a long time, money and success seemed utterly unimportant. What mattered now was finding Sarah and that boy. And somehow, trying to right the terrible wrong he had committed 10 years ago. As the taxi cruised through the streets of Chicago, Andrew found himself lost in memories of the past. His mind took him back to a night 10 years ago in a hotel bar in New York. Andrew was there on business, trying to close a major deal. Frustrated after another day of fruitless meetings, he ordered a drink at the bar. That's when she appeared, Vanessa, beautiful and confident, with a smile that promised adventure. "Tough day?" she asked, sitting down beside him. That conversation changed everything. Vanessa was an executive at a large company, full of connections and ambition. She spoke of money and power in a way that made Andrew feel small, yet eager for more. In the months that followed, Andrew made excuses for more business trips. Each encounter with Vanessa left him more addicted to her presence, her promises of a luxurious and successful life. "You deserve more, Andrew," Vanessa would say. "With the right people, you could be a millionaire." Andrew found himself comparing his simple life with Sarah to the glamorous existence Vanessa offered. Sarah, a dedicated teacher and loving wife, seemed not to understand his ambitions. "Why do you need more?" Sarah would ask. "Aren't we happy as we are?" But Andrew wanted more. Much more. The conflict within him grew each day. He loved Sarah, but the desire for wealth and status consumed him. Vanessa represented everything he thought he wanted: success, power, recognition. On a chilly autumn night, Andrew made a decision that would change several lives forever. He waited for Sarah to fall asleep, packed a bag, and wrote a brief, cold letter. "Sarah, I can no longer continue like this. I need more from life than you can give me. Please do not try to find me. Andrew." With a heavy heart but blinded by ambition, Andrew left the apartment without looking back. The tears he refused to shed burned in his eyes as he drove to the airport, heading for a new life with Vanessa. What Andrew did not know was that, just a few days later, Sarah would discover she was pregnant. Alone and devastated, she wept for hours holding the pregnancy test, unsure how to face the future without Andrew. Back in the present, in the taxi in Chicago, Andrew felt the crushing weight of his past actions. How could he have been so selfish? So blind? "We're here, sir," the taxi driver's voice brought him back to reality. Andrew found himself in front of his friend Detective Frank's office. With trembling hands, he paid the fare and exited the taxi. "I need to find them," Andrew murmured to himself, determined. Inside Frank's dusty office, Andrew poured out the whole story. The meeting at the airport, his suspicions, his desperate need to know the truth. "Do you realize what you're doing, Andrew?" Frank asked, concerned. "This could change everything in your life." "I know," Andrew replied, running his hands through his hair. "But I need to know. I need to make this right." Frank sighed but began taking notes. "I'll need more details about Sarah. Last known address, job, anything that might give us a lead." Andrew closed his eyes, trying to remember. Every memory of Sarah was like a stab of guilt. "She was a teacher," he began. "She worked at an elementary school in the north of the city. Our apartment was..." As Andrew provided information, his phone kept ringing. Vanessa, insistent. He continued to ignore her. "This will take a while," Frank warned. "I'll need a few days to gather concrete information." Andrew nodded, anxious and impatient. "Do whatever it takes. Money is no object." Leaving Frank's office, Andrew found himself lost in the middle of Chicago. The city that once felt like home now seemed foreign and hostile. He had money, success, everything he always wanted. But at that moment, he would give anything to go back in time and make the right choice. With the weight of the past on his shoulders and an uncertain future ahead, Andrew began his journey to correct the biggest mistake of his life. Finding Sarah and the child became his only mission. He only hoped it wasn't too late. In the days that followed, Andrew stayed at a hotel in Chicago, anxiously awaiting news from Frank. He barely slept, tormented by thoughts of Sarah and the boy who might be his son. Meanwhile, across the city, Sarah woke up early as usual. The modest house she called home was quiet except for the soft sound of cartoons coming from the living room. "Ethan, breakfast," Sarah called, placing pancakes on the table. A 10-year-old boy with tousled blonde hair ran into the kitchen. "Yay, pancakes." Sarah smiled, messing up her son's hair even more. For a moment, her smile faltered as she noticed, once again, how much Ethan resembled Andrew. As Ethan ate, Sarah got lost in memories. The first years after Andrew left were a nightmare. Pregnant and alone, she struggled to keep her teaching job as her belly grew. A flashback came to her mind, Sarah, 8 months pregnant, sitting on the bathroom floor, crying. Unpaid bills scattered around her. The fear of the future consuming her. Back in the present, Sarah shook her head, pushing away the painful memories. "We made it, didn't we, honey?" she whispered to Ethan, who was too busy with his pancakes to notice. The doorbell rang. It was Mark, Sarah's boyfriend for 2 years. A kind man, with an easy smile and gentle eyes. "Good morning, my loves," said Mark, entering and giving Sarah a kiss and Ethan a hug. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude. Mark had been a blessing in their lives, accepting Ethan as if he were his own son. Across town, Andrew received the first pieces of information from Frank. "She still lives in the same neighborhood, Andrew," Frank said over the phone. "In a small house on Maple Street." Andrew's heart raced. So close, after so long. "And the boy?" he asked anxiously. "Yes, she has a son. Ethan, 10 years old. Attends the local school. From what I could find out, Sarah has been raising him alone since birth." The words hit Andrew like a punch. It was true. He had a son. A son he had never met, who grew up fatherless. "There's one more thing," continued Frank. "Sarah has been dating for 2 years. A guy named Mark. From what I know, he's very present in their lives." Andrew felt a twinge of jealousy that surprised him. What right did he have to feel jealous? Meanwhile, in her mansion in the affluent suburbs of Chicago, Vanessa paced back and forth, furious. Andrew hadn't answered her calls for days. First, he missed the important flight. Now, he was completely absent. "Something's wrong," she murmured to herself, her mind scheming possibilities. Back at Sarah's house, the morning routine continued. Mark helped Ethan with his backpack while Sarah prepared the boys' lunch. "Don't forget we have that dinner with my parents tonight," Mark reminded gently. Sarah nodded, smiling. But inside, she felt an inexplicable restlessness. Ever since she had seen that man at the airport, a man who looked too much like Andrew, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Andrew, now driving slowly down Maple Street, felt the same. His heart nearly stopped when he spotted the modest house Frank had described. A swing in the front yard, a bike leaned against the porch. He parked across the street, watching. What would he say? How would he explain his actions? How would he ask for forgiveness for 10 years of absence? At that moment, the front door opened. Sarah came out, beautiful as ever, followed by Ethan and a man Andrew assumed to be Mark. They laughed, a happy family on their way to school. Andrew sank into the car seat, a whirlwind of emotions consuming him. Guilt, regret, jealousy, fear. But also a growing determination. Somehow, he needed to be part of that life. He needed to meet his son. He needed to mend what had been broken so long ago. But how could he do that without destroying the happiness that Sarah and Ethan seemed to have found? In the days that followed, Andrew couldn't stay away from Maple Street. He parked his car a few houses down, watching the routine of Sarah's family. Every glimpse of Ethan made his heart clench. One sunny afternoon, Andrew mustered the courage to get out of his car. He walked on the opposite sidewalk, pretending casualness, when Sarah stepped out to water her plants. Their eyes met. The watering can dropped from Sarah's hands, water spreading across the ground. "Andrew," she whispered, incredulous. Before he could reply, Sarah crossed the street, her eyes sparking with anger. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Andrew stuttered, "Sarah, I saw you at the airport. With Ethan. I needed." "Don't you dare say his name." Sarah interrupted. "You don't have that right." Curious neighbors began to peer through their windows, drawn by the commotion. "Sarah, please," Andrew begged. "I know I messed up. But Ethan, he's my son, isn't he?" Sarah closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. When she opened them, they were filled with unshed tears. "Yes," she finally said. "Ethan is your biological son. The son you abandoned before you even knew he existed." Andrew felt the words slap him. "I didn't know," he murmured. "If I had known." "What?" Sarah retorted. "You would have stayed?" "Don't lie to yourself, Andrew. You made your choice 10 years ago." Andrew stepped forward. "Let me meet him. Please. I know I don't deserve it, but—" "No!" Sarah nearly shouted. "You're right, you don't deserve. Ethan has a good life, a family that loves him. I won't let you mess that up." At that moment, a car pulled up. Mark stepped out, looking confused from the agitated Sarah to the well-dressed stranger. "Is everything okay, love?" Mark asked, placing a protective arm around Sarah. Andrew felt a wave of irrational jealousy. That man was living the life that should have been his. "It is," Sarah responded, not taking her eyes off Andrew. "He's just leaving." Mark looked from one to the other, sensing the tension. "Do you two know each other?" Before Sarah could answer, a school bus stopped at the corner. Ethan got off, walking toward them. Panic overtook Sarah. "Andrew, leave. Now." Without thinking, Andrew hid behind a tree. His heart pounded as he watched Ethan approach. The boy was his spitting image as a child. "Mom? Is everything okay?" Ethan asked, noticing Sarah's agitated state. Sarah forced a smile. "Everything's great, dear. Let's go inside, shall we? Mark will help with your homework." Ethan entered, followed by Mark, who cast one last confused look towards where Andrew was hiding. Sarah stayed back. "Go away, Andrew," she said quietly. "Don't come back. Please." Andrew stepped out from behind the tree, devastated. "Sarah, No," she interrupted. "You have no idea what I've been through. What Ethan's been through. I won't let you ruin everything now." With that, Sarah went inside, closing the door firmly. Andrew stood on the sidewalk, feeling more lost than ever. He had seen his son, so close yet so far. Inside the house, Sarah leaned against the closed door, trembling. Mark appeared in the hallway, concerned. "Sarah? Who was that man?" She looked at Mark, the man who had been her safe harbor in recent years. She owed him the truth. That was Andrew. "Ethan's father," she started, her voice faltering. Mark paled. "What? But how?" Sarah took a deep breath. "It's a long story. One I hoped I'd never have to tell again." Meanwhile, Andrew returned to his car, devastated but determined. He had made the worst mistake of his life 10 years ago. Now, he needed to find a way to make things right, no matter how impossible it seemed. Andrew spent the night sleepless in the hotel, tormented by painful memories. For the first time, he confronted his past behavior with brutal clarity. Flashbacks filled his mind, Andrew and Sarah, 5 years before the abandonment. Sarah, excited, shares about a promotion opportunity at the school. "That's great, dear," Andrew says distractedly, not looking up from his newspaper. "But don't get too excited. After all, it's just an elementary school." Sarah's smile visibly wilts. Another flashback, Sarah suggests they save money so she can pursue a master's degree. Andrew laughs. "For what? It's not like you're going to earn much more teaching kids to color." Back in the present, Andrew feels shame gnawing at his stomach. How could he have been so blind, so insensitive? Meanwhile, at the Maple Street house, Sarah and Mark spoke softly in the kitchen after Ethan went to bed. "Do you think we should tell him?" Mark asks gently. Sarah sighs, running her hands over her tired face. "I don't know. He has the right to know, but what if it hurts him? What if Andrew disappears again?" Mark hugs Sarah, offering silent comfort. The next morning, Ethan comes down for breakfast, finding Mark alone in the kitchen. "Where's Mom?" he asks, yawning. "She had to leave early," Mark replies, placing pancakes on Ethan's plate. Ethan fiddles with his fork, looking thoughtful. "Mark, can I ask you something?" "Of course, champ." "It's about my real dad." Mark freezes, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "What do you want to know? Why did he leave? Did he not like me?" Mark's heart breaks seeing Ethan's vulnerable expression. "Hey, it's nothing like that. It's complicated. But it has nothing to do with you, okay?" Ethan nods, not entirely convinced. Outside, Andrew watches the scene through the window, his heart tight. He sees the affectionate interaction between Mark and Ethan, feeling like an outsider. Determined, Andrew waits for Ethan to leave for school. As the boy passes by, he approaches casually. "Hey, kid. Is this ball yours?" Andrew asks, holding a soccer ball. Ethan looks wary. "No." "Oh, I thought it might have dropped from your yard. Do you play?" "Sometimes," with Mark, Ethan replies, relaxing a bit. Andrew feels a sting of jealousy. "Cool. You know, I used to play a lot when I was your age." They chat for a few minutes. Andrew savors every second, memorizing every detail of his son's face. "I have to go," Ethan finally says. "I'll be late for school." Sure, Andrew responds, reluctant to let him go. "It was nice talking to you, Ethan." Ethan waves and runs off, leaving Andrew with a mix of joy and sadness. Far away, in the suburban mansion, Vanessa finally gets information about Andrew's whereabouts. She hires a private detective who quickly uncovers the shocking truth. A son? Vanessa hisses, her eyes dangerously bright. That fool has a son he never told me about? She paces the luxurious room, her mind racing. This explains Andrew's strange behavior, his sudden disappearance. A cruel smile forms on her lips. So that's how it's going to be, dear? Want to trade your life of luxury for a school teacher and a kid? Vanessa picks up the phone, her fingers dialing quickly. Hello? Mr. Johnson? I need you to investigate more about this boy. Ethan, right? I want to know everything. And prepare the divorce papers. Looks like I'll be needing them soon. She hangs up, a plan already forming in her mind. If Andrew thinks he can simply leave her and his life of wealth, he's in for a big surprise. Vanessa won't give up without a fight. And she always fights to win. Sarah spent the night restless, wrestling with her thoughts. By morning, with deep dark circles under her eyes, she made her decision. It was time Ethan knew the truth. Ethan, dear, can we talk? Sarah called after breakfast. Seated on the couch, Sarah took a deep breath. Remember when you asked about your father? Ethan nodded, curious. Well, there's something I need to tell you, Sarah began, her voice trembling. Your father, he's in town. He wants to meet you. Ethan's eyes widened. What? He's alive? Sarah explained everything how Andrew had left them, how she found out about her pregnancy afterward. With each word, Ethan's expression shifted from surprise to confusion, and finally, to anger. He abandoned us? Ethan shouted, standing up. And now he wants to meet me? No. I don't want to see him. Ethan, please, understand. Sarah tried to soothe him. Understand what? That my real father is a coward? Ethan ran to his room, slamming the door. Sarah sank into the couch, tears streaming down. She knew it would be hard, but the pain in Ethan's eyes tore her apart. Meanwhile, Andrew finally confronted Vanessa in her mansion. Why are you here? Vanessa asked coldly. I thought you were too busy with your little secret family. Andrew was shocked. How did you? Oh, darling, Vanessa laughed humorlessly. I always know everything. The question is, what are you going to do? I'm here to say it's over, Vanessa. I can't keep living this lie. Vanessa's face twisted with anger. You think you can just leave me? After everything I've done for you? What you did was manipulate me. Andrew retorted. You fueled my ambition, made me abandon Sarah. And you came so willingly, Vanessa interrupted, sarcastic. Don't play the victim, Andrew. You chose money and power. I merely showed the way. Andrew felt the shame burning. She was right, he had made his own choices. Well, I'm choosing differently now, he said, turning to leave. If you walk out that door, Vanessa threatened, I'll expose all your dirty dealings. Every under-the-table deal, every bribe. You'll lose everything. Andrew stopped, frozen. He knew she meant it. Back at Sarah's house, Mark came home from work to find her still shaken on the couch. What happened? He asked, concerned. Sarah explained the conversation with Ethan. Mark hugged her, but she felt his tension. Do you think I did the right thing? Sarah asked, uncertain. Mark hesitated. I think so, but what now? Is Andrew going to be part of our lives? Sarah heard the fear in Mark's voice. He is Ethan's father, Mark. But you are the one who's always been here. Mark nodded, but the air between them was charged with uncertainties. That night, Andrew wandered the streets, his mind a whirlwind. Vanessa's threats echoed in his ears, mixing with memories of his past behavior. Flashbacks surged, Andrew dismissing Sarah's dreams of pursuing a master's degree. Andrew neglecting Sarah's emotional needs, focused only on earning more. The realization struck him like a punch. His sexism and greed had not only destroyed his marriage but stolen precious years with his son. Standing outside Sarah's house, Andrew saw Ethan's bedroom light turn off. His son, so close yet so far. I'm sorry, Andrew murmured to the night. Sorry for everything. He knew he had a long road ahead. Facing Vanessa, correcting past mistakes, earning back the trust of Ethan and Sarah. But for the first time in years, Andrew was determined to do the right thing, no matter the cost. With one last look at the house, Andrew turned and walked down the dark street, ready to face the consequences of his actions and fight for a chance to be part of his son's life. Andrew wandered aimlessly through the streets of Chicago, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Guilt consumed him, but the desire to connect with Ethan drove him forward. He felt like a boat in the middle of a storm, rudderless and directionless. One afternoon, Andrew saw Ethan leaving school. Without thinking, he approached him. Hey, Ethan. Remember me? The soccer ball guy, Andrew smiled nervously. Ethan looked at him suspiciously. Yeah, what do you want? I just wanted to see how you were doing, Andrew stammered, realizing too late how strange he must have seemed. I'm fine, Ethan replied, moving away quickly. Andrew stood there, feeling like a complete fool. Later, in his hotel room, he cried for the first time in years, the reality of his failure as a father hitting him with full force. Sarah, watching from a distance, noticed Andrew's awkward attempts. Part of her wanted to scream at him to stay away, to protect Ethan at all costs. But another part, a part she barely recognized, felt pity for Andrew. He's trying to reach out to you, Sarah told Ethan one night. Ethan frowned. Why? He didn't care before. Sarah sighed. People make mistakes, dear. Sometimes, very big ones. He hurt you, Ethan said, his voice a mix of anger and sadness. Sarah hugged her son, her heart breaking for the pain she saw in his eyes. Meanwhile, Mark, sensing the shift in the air, made a decision. On a starry night, he took Sarah out for a romantic dinner. Sarah, he said, kneeling and presenting a ring, will you marry me? Sarah was speechless, tears in her eyes. She loved Mark, he was stable, reliable. But the proposal, amidst all the emotional chaos, caught her off guard. I need to think about it, she responded, seeing the disappointment in Mark's eyes. Days later, Ethan was riding his bike down the street when a car suddenly appeared. Andrew, watching from afar, ran without thinking. He pushed Ethan out of the way, both falling onto the grass. Are you okay? Andrew asked, his heart racing. Ethan, startled but unharmed, nodded. Thank you, he murmured, looking at Andrew with a mix of fear and curiosity. Andrew wanted to hug Ethan, to tell him he was his father, that he loved him. But he restrained himself, helping the boy to stand up quietly. Far away, Vanessa was plotting. She hired investigators to dig deeper into Andrew's life, determined to find something she could use against him. Find out everything about his business dealings over the last 10 years, she ordered on the phone. Every penny, every deal. I want to destroy him. Unaware of Vanessa's scheming, Andrew spent sleepless nights questioning every decision that had brought him to this point. He looked at his expensive suits, his luxury watches, feeling disgusted with himself. One night, walking through the city, Andrew stopped in front of a toy store. In the display window, he saw a wooden train, just like the one he had as a child. Tears came to his eyes as he thought of all the birthdays of Ethan he had missed. At that moment, Andrew made a decision. He couldn't change the past, but he could fight for a better future. Even if Sarah and Ethan never fully forgave him, he would do everything in his power to be present in his son's life. With renewed determination, Andrew returned to his hotel. He picked up the phone, ready to make the call that could change everything. "Frank? It's Andrew. I need your help to sort out some legal stuff. It's time to settle accounts with the past." As night fell over Chicago, Andrew felt he was in the eye of the storm. The worst was yet to come, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face the consequences of his actions, no matter the cost. The truth, like a ticking time bomb, finally exploded on a Sunday afternoon. Ethan, returning from a stroll in the park, saw Andrew chatting with Sarah on the porch. Suddenly, everything made sense. The man with the soccer ball, the stranger who saved him from the accident, was his father. "Is it him, isn't it?" Ethan yelled, running towards them. "It's my dad." Sarah and Andrew froze, caught off guard. "Ethan, I can explain." Sarah started, but Ethan was already in tears. "Why did you lie? Why did you let him get close?" he shouted, anger and confusion clear in his voice. Andrew stepped forward. "Ethan, it's my fault. Your mother was just trying to protect you." Ethan looked at Andrew, his eyes filled with hurt. "You abandoned us. Why come back now?" The painful confrontation lasted hours, with Ethan alternating between anger and crying, Sarah trying to calm the situation, and Andrew facing the harsh truths of his past actions. Meanwhile, in his office, Andrew made the toughest decision of his life. He picked up the phone, his hands trembling. "Mr. Johnson? This is Andrew Thompson. I need to confess some unethical business practices I've conducted over the past years." Andrew knew this would mean the end of his fortune, possibly even prison. But he could no longer live with the weight of these secrets. At Sarah's house, Mark arrived amidst the turmoil. Seeing Andrew there, his expression darkened. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice tense. Sarah, emotionally and physically exhausted, pulled Mark aside. "Mark, I can't marry you." The words came out before she could think. Mark recoiled as if slapped. "Is it because of him?" Mark asked, pointing at Andrew. "No," Sarah answered honestly. "It's for me. For Ethan. We need to resolve this, our past. I can't drag you into this mess." Mark left, hurt and confused, leaving Sarah heartbroken but strangely relieved. The next morning, Andrew's world completely crumbled. Headlines screamed, "Business magnate confesses to fraud." Vanessa, furious with Andrew's confession, had leaked every sordid detail she could find to the press. Reporters surrounded Sarah's house, shouting questions about Andrew and Ethan. Sarah, horrified, tried to shield Ethan from the chaos. Mom, why are they here? Ethan asked, frightened. It's complicated, dear, Sarah replied, closing the curtains. But it will pass. Andrew, besieged in his hotel, watched his life fall apart. His assets were frozen, business partners abandoned him, and the possibility of prison became very real. Desperate, he called Sarah. I'm sorry, he said as soon as she answered. I didn't want this to affect you. Sarah sighed. I know, Andrew. But it has. What are we going to do now? Andrew closed his eyes, guilt consuming him. I'll fix this, Sarah. Somehow. That night, as camera flashes lit up the street, Sarah sat with Ethan in his room. Ethan, I know this is hard, she began. But your father, he's trying to do the right thing now. Ethan was silent for a moment. Is he going to prison? Sarah felt her heart squeeze. I don't know, dear. But no matter what happens, we'll be together, okay? Meanwhile, Andrew faced the very real possibility of losing everything. But, for the first time in years, he felt at peace. The truth had a high price, but it was a price he was willing to pay for a chance to be part of his son's life. Sitting alone in his hotel room, Andrew picked up the phone one more time. It was time to face the consequences of his actions, no matter how painful. Hello? Yes, this is Andrew Thompson. I'm ready to surrender to the authorities. The sun had barely risen when Sarah entered Ethan's room to wake him. Her heart stopped as she saw the empty bed and the open window. A crumpled note on the nightstand read, I need to think. Don't look for me. In a panic, Sarah called Andrew. Ethan has run away, she shouted as soon as he answered. Andrew felt the world spin. I'm on my way now, he said, already rushing to the door. When Andrew arrived, he found Sarah crying on the porch. For a moment, they forgot all their past, united by their concern for their son. We will find him, Andrew promised, holding Sarah's hands. They began their search, going through every street, every park Ethan used to visit. With each passing minute, their fear grew. What if something happens to him? Sarah murmured, her voice trembling. Andrew swallowed hard. Nothing will happen. We can't lose hope. As they searched, memories of the past flooded their minds. Sarah remembered Andrew playing with little Ethan in the garden before everything fell apart. Andrew relived the moment he held Ethan for the first time in the hospital, the love he felt, the fears that made him run away. It was late afternoon when Mark appeared, out of breath. I came as soon as I heard, he said. How can I help? Sarah looked at him, surprised and grateful. Despite everything, Mark still cared. Thank you, she whispered, gently touching his arm. The three split up, covering more ground. The night came, cold and threatening, increasing everyone's despair. It was Andrew who finally found a clue. In the old park where he used to take Sarah years ago, he saw a lone figure sitting on a swing. Ethan, he called softly, approaching. The boy looked up, his eyes red from crying. Why did you come back? He asked, his voice choked. Why now? Andrew sat on the swing next to him, his heart heavy. Because I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left. And I've regretted it every day since. Ethan was silent for a moment. You hurt Mom. You left us. I know, Andrew replied, tears in his eyes. And there's nothing I can do to change that. But I'm here now, trying to make things right. Even if you never forgive me, I want you to know that I love you, Ethan. I always have. At that moment, Sarah and Mark arrived running. Ethan! Sarah exclaimed, embracing her son tightly. The scene was interrupted by Vanessa's arrival, storming in. So this is it, she shouted at Andrew. You throw away everything we built for this pathetic little family? Andrew stood up, positioning himself between Vanessa and his family. Enough, Vanessa. It's over. Over? She laughed bitterly. You're going to lose everything, Andrew. Your fortune, your freedom. For what? Andrew looked at Sarah and Ethan, then back at Vanessa. For something money can't buy. Family. True love. Vanessa advanced, furious, but Mark intervened, holding her back. I think you better leave, he said firmly. Seeing herself outnumbered, Vanessa cast one last look of contempt and left, leaving a tense silence behind. Andrew turned to Sarah, Ethan, and Mark. I'm sorry, he said, his voice laden with emotion. For everything. For what I did in the past, for the chaos I've brought into your lives now. I will turn myself in to the authorities tomorrow. You won't have to worry about me anymore. Ethan, surprising everyone, stepped forward. You're going to prison? Andrew nodded sadly. Probably. I did wrong things, Ethan. And I need to pay for them. Ethan looked at Sarah, then back at Andrew. But what if I want to get to know you better? Andrew's heart swelled with hope. I'd like that more than anything. But I understand if you don't want to. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, hugged Ethan. It's your choice, dear. We'll be here for you, no matter what you decide. In that moment, under the stars of the old park, a broken family began slowly to heal. It wouldn't be easy, there was much to resolve, much to forgive. But for the first time in years, there was hope. Andrew, Sarah, and Ethan embraced, a hug full of tears, regret, and above all, love. Mark watched from a distance, a sad smile on his lips, knowing he had done the right thing. The future was uncertain, but that night, at least, they were together. And for now, that was enough. The sound of the judge's gavel echoed through the courtroom, sealing Andrew's fate. Found guilty of financial fraud, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison and ordered to return all his ill-gotten wealth. Andrew accepted the verdict with a calm that surprised everyone. To him, it was a fair price for his mistakes. In the months that followed, Andrew used his time in prison to reflect and plan his future. He enrolled in business ethics courses and began developing ideas to assist small businesses once released. Sarah, true to her word, allowed Ethan to visit Andrew in prison. The first visits were tense and uncomfortable, but gradually, father and son truly began to know each other. How was school this week? Andrew would ask, genuinely interested. Ethan, initially reluctant, began to open up. I had a math test. I think I did well. Andrew smiled, proud. I'm sure you did. You're very smart, Ethan. Over time, their conversations deepened. Ethan asked tough questions about the past, and Andrew answered honestly, however painful it might be. Sarah watched the development of this relationship with a mix of apprehension and hope. She maintained clear boundaries, ensuring Andrew understood his role in Ethan's life. He needs you as a father, Sarah told Andrew during one visit. But I can't risk him being hurt again. Andrew nodded, respecting Sarah's decision. I understand. I'll do everything to be the father Ethan deserves. Meanwhile, life continued outside the prison walls. Sarah and Mark, after much reflection and honest conversations, decided to give their relationship a second chance. On a sunny spring day, Sarah walked down the aisle, beautiful in a simple dress. Mark waited for her, his eyes shining with love. Ethan, proud, carried the rings. Andrew, still in prison, received the news with mixed emotions. There was a twinge of sadness, but mostly, he felt relief knowing Sarah and Ethan had found stability and love. When Andrew was finally released, he was determined to rebuild his life honestly. Using his business knowledge, he started working with an NGO that offered free consulting to small entrepreneurs. I want to use my skills for good now, he explained to Ethan during one of their weekly meetings in the park. Ethan, now 12, looked at his father with new respect. That's cool, Dad. The word Dad still made Andrew's heart leap. It was a title he was determined to earn every day. Sarah watched the new family dynamics develop cautiously. She and Mark provided Ethan with a stable, loving home, while Andrew strove to be a present, responsible father. A year after his release, Andrew attended Ethan's science fair at school. Standing beside Sarah and Mark, he felt a wave of gratitude for being part of his son's life, albeit differently than he had imagined. I'm proud of you, son, Andrew told Ethan after his presentation. Ethan smiled, hugging Andrew, then Sarah and Mark. It was a scene few would have imagined possible months ago in an unconventional family, yet united by their love for Ethan. Later that night, Andrew reflected on his journey. He thought about his past chauvinistic behavior, how he undervalued Sarah and her ambitions. Now, he clearly saw how wrong he was. Thank you for giving me this chance, Andrew said to Sarah when she came to pick up Ethan. Sarah nodded, her gaze softening. You're making an effort, Andrew. Ethan sees it. We all do. As he watched Sarah and Ethan leave, Andrew felt a peace he had never experienced during his years of wealth and power. He had lost a fortune but gained something far more valuable, the chance to be a good father, a better man. The road ahead was still long. There was much to learn, much to correct. But Andrew was determined to move forward, one day at a time, always striving to be the best version of himself. That night, under the stars of Chicago, Andrew made a silent promise to himself, to Ethan, to Sarah, and to everyone he had hurt. He would live the rest of his days with integrity, compassion, and love. It was the least he could do to honor the second chance life had given him. And so, with hope in his heart and determination in his eyes, Andrew walked toward his modest apartment, ready to face whatever tomorrow brought. His journey of redemption was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he was on the right path. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our moving stories. Share with your friends so they too can be touched, and in the comments, tell us what you thought. We want to hear your opinions and your suggestions to continue bringing content that touches the